A juror was suddenly removed, explosive texts were revealed, and prosecutors attempted to paint an even darker picture of Sean Diddy Combs' inner circle. From escort logistics to alleged drug use, jurors were walked through a flood of messages that prosecutors say exposed the operation behind the accusations. We're going to break it all down with Law&Crime's in-court reporter Elizabeth Millner right now. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. Day 24 of the federal sex trafficking and racketeering trial against Sean Diddy Combs ended with more explosive developments both inside and outside of the witness box. The surprise move by the judge to remove a seated juror drew very sharp objections from the defense, and once testimony got underway, jurors were led through this trove of texts and internal documents revealing alleged drug use, escort arrangements, disturbing behind-the-scenes behavior at the center of the government's case. So to give us that special inside look at what went down in today's proceedings, you know who I'm going to bring in, Law&Crime's in-court reporter Elizabeth Millner, who's been there for every step of the action. Elizabeth, so good to see you. So before we get into the testimony, we got to talk about this drama with a juror, juror number 6. Dismissed. What happened?
Yeah, so it didn't necessarily come as a surprise that this particular juror, that being juror number 6, was dismissed. I think the judge was kind of signaling that this that this specific juror was going to be dismissed, kind of hinting about this on Friday. But then he took into consideration what the defense had to say, as they made really an impassioned speech about why this particular juror should stay. But as far as what the judge said this morning in court, he said, you know, I understand it's important, but this amount of scrutiny is not necessary. And I think it kind of had to do with just the letter that the defense had, just kind of accusing the prosecution of dismissing this particular juror, mainly based off race and just other accusations from the defense to the government. And so as far as what the judge said, he said the inconsistencies from this specific juror raised a lot of issues. And pretty much these inconsistencies were just about where this particular juror lived. So he was registered in Bronx County. He picked up the call to serve on this jury from Bronx County. However, there was this kind of this statement that was made to a jury staff member, just kind of out of jest from this particular juror, where just he had mentioned something along the lines of, oh, the traffic from New Jersey is crazy, or oh, I just had to travel all the way down from New Jersey, which kind of signaled to other staffers, okay, what's going on here, given that you're a juror from Bronx County, or specifically from the Bronx. And so what ended up happening is the judge brought this particular juror back in the robing room, or judge's chambers, and spoke to this juror just about what was really happening, and spoke to him about a couple of times here. So it wasn't just a one and done type of situation, Jesse. It was something that had been mulling over for a couple of days. And so the judge ended up going back and looking at the record pretty closely. So he reviewed the transcript from the robing room, but also he went back even further and looked at just some of the questions and answers from the jury selection process. So the judge said that there were inconsistencies, and clear inconsistencies, from voir dire, which is jury selection, and the robing room conversations. And the judge had serious concerns about this particular juror's candor and how the juror might have just kind of skewed his answers during the jury selection process, and even when he was having these discussions with the judge too in the robing room, and how he might have skewed his answers in order to just stay on the jury. And so the judge said this is threatening the integrity of the jury process. So the defense brought up that the juror will be placed by a white juror, and the defense was kind of really adamant that they just did not want this particular juror dismissed. And so the court took the weekend to look at the defense's argument and everything they had to say, and they didn't believe, they being the court, didn't believe that further inquiry of this jury is appropriate, and they actually said that further inquiry would be inappropriate. And so the judge said that there is nothing that the juror could say that would put the genie back in the bottle. He said this is why we have alternate jurors, precisely for this particular situation. And so the defense did ask the court to not make this decision based off race, but the court should and cannot let race be a factor. The judge saying that there was no evidence even of prosecutorial misconduct, and there was zero evidence of that too. So what ended up happening is that juror number 6 was dismissed from the case. So the jury box looks just a little bit differently going forward now, as a lot of the jurors, especially starting kind of in the back row, shifted just one seat over to, I guess, the left of the jury box. And so now we see one of the alternates becoming now an official juror. Well, they've always been a juror, right? But now they're officially going to be on the kind of jury pool to be deliberating. And so A lot of stuff happened just this morning, but I think, the writing was on the wall that the judge was ultimately leaning toward dismissing juror number 6.
And you make a good point for everybody out there. It's not like this alternate juror has been in a locked room for the past 6 weeks. They've been hearing all the same testimony as the seated jurors. Now they just will become a part of the actual deliberation process. Elizabeth, real quick, was there some issue with another juror too, but we don't have a lot of information about what's going on with that?
Yeah, so what we did learn is that the issues concerning these 2 jurors really have nothing to do with one another, but we did kind of learn a little bit possibly more information, and that was from TMZ. So shout out to Brian Andrews and the TMZ team, because we did kind of learn that I guess this other issue with another juror had to do with a text message they received from somebody. It was from an unknown sender asking if this person was the juror that was going to be dismissed. And so there was no conversations that were had outside the presence of the jury today, as far as even any types of decisions about whether this particular juror who got the message, because the big thing is they're not supposed to be talking about this case outside, but then there's also the issue, this jury isn't sequestered. So I'm always kind of curious too whether or not they're getting a lot of information. The judge, before they're dismissed for the weekend, or even at the end of the day, is like, don't talk about this case with anyone, turn off your notifications. If you see an article about this case, turn it off, throw your phone away, go outside, those types of things. And so from right now, what we know is that there hasn't been any type of action taken on this particular juror, but the juror did feel a type of way and letting the court know that they did receive this type of message. But as far as any action, as far as dismissing the juror or questioning this juror even further, nothing has been taken today.
And I'll tell you, when we do the lunchtime show on Law&Crime's YouTube channel, I can't tell you how many questions we get was it a mistake to not sequester this jury? How can we ensure they don't follow anything about the case? I mean, at the end of the day, they should not know who you are, Elizabeth. The person who's the face of Law&Crime's coverage of this, they should not know who you are. They should not know who I am. And if they do, it's a problem. Okay. So we move past the juror issue. Now we go into summary witnesses. Summary witness is very interesting in a case like this. Basically, when you have a voluminous amount of material, particularly digital evidence, you need sometimes a witness to kind of condense it, to kind of do an overview, to summarize what it's about. You have charts that are presented by the government. So obviously in a racketeering case like this, and particularly when you have so many different players and all these underlying allegations, I'm not surprised. I want to talk about the first witness, this first summary witness. It was a paralegal, and her name is, and correct me if I mispronounce it, Anya Sanker. What was her role?
Yeah, so Anyanya Sanker, I hope I'm pronouncing it right too, Jesse. So her role essentially was just reviewing 2 of the charts that were in this case, and those being the summary charts. And so she said that the government prepared the charts, but then Sankar's role was just reviewing these charts for accuracy. And so she reviewed text messages, documents, audio messages, audio files, which are completely different, and then just other things like that. And so we saw exhibits of, text message timelines, but these ones were specifically from a person that's been brought up a number of times in this trial. However, we haven't heard from this person or directly from her mouth, and that obviously being Christina Coram. And so what we did learn is just about, the messages that were sent on her device, the device that was obtained by HSI during the raids. And so there were just a number of text messages from Christina Coram to Dave Shirley, an assistant, and then just some other messages too, including messages to Jane, messages to Cassie, messages to Sean Combs, aka Diddy, aka PD, as some messages call him himself. And so what we were able to see from this particular chart was dates and times, the record type, from whoever the sender was, and then to whoever the sender was sending that to, the content file name, and then the source of it all, which is essentially just where the government exhibit is. So that way, whenever the jury goes back to deliberate, they're able to kind of easily find everything because everything's all summed up into one chart. But we saw kind of records from the earliest time frame being March 18th of 2016 to February 26th of 2024. And I thought those dates were pretty interesting because if you think about it, February 26th of 2024 being kind of the last record that they have, I thought was like, oh, okay, because given that the raids happened in March and then Diddy's arrest didn't happen until September, I thought the dates would be a little more current than they actually were. And even going back to March 18th of 2016, that being the earliest of these particular records, that was years into Christina Quorum's role already as Diddy's kind of head assistant. And so what we did end up seeing is just some text messages. So we did see one message, this being December 29th of 2019, and it was a message from Ryan Lopez to Christina Quorum, Ryan Lopez being one of the assistants. And he said, you know, LOL, think I saw one of the cowboys. You can spot them in the lobby like an escort. I forgot to tell you about it. Then Christina Quorum writes to Ryan Lopez, laughing emoji. By the way, how long is he going to stay awake? Then Ryan Lopez wrote back to Christina Quorum, LOL, I'm guessing until tomorrow night. Then we heard some audio files, this one being from, you know, and they kind of jumped around, honestly, Jesse, from time frame to time frame. So we saw one audio file from January 30th of 2023, and the source was a voice memo, but it was an audio kind of recording that we had heard previously, and that was the recording from Christina Quorum talking to Jonathan Perez, one of the assistants, just about that sexually explicit video that was found on the staff iPad, where Christina Quorum kind of pulls him to the side and is like, I need to tell you, or I need you to tell me step by step and don't miss a beat, just as far as how everyone found this particular video. So it was something that we've heard before. And even some of these text messages that we saw in this particular exhibit were texts that we've seen before, which means the jury has seen it before too. There was one text exhibit. This was from March 18th of 2016 to March 20th of that same year. It was between Christina Quorum and Dave Shirley, that being the assistant, of course. And Christina Quorum is saying, can you head to the Four Seasons to set up room? He said, bring water, Gatorade, chicken noodle soup too. So interesting of kind of where they were going in this type of direction. I think what the government was trying to do was really just show just how the preparation occurs for these hotel nights. You know, I think at points the defense was kind of insinuating that the assistants didn't know about these hotel nights, but according to some of the text messages that we saw presented by the government, it seems like everyone was kind of in the know about what these particular hotel nights, one, entailed, but also what they required too. And so you see a message from Dave Shirley that's saying, okay, is an Uber taking them still? And then, you know, I'm kind of paraphrasing here because there were so many messages. And then he later says, Rock riding with them. And then Christina Quorum responds, no Rock, just CC and PD, presuming that PD is obviously P. Diddy and CC being Cassie Ventura, something that Cassie has even testified was kind of a nickname that she has been called too. And then, we see another message from Melissa Fiola. So this must have been one of the group messages where Melissa writes, adjourning room not available, hotel now sold out. And then we see another message, this being from the next day from Christina Quorum to Dave Shirley, again, this being in March of 2016, where Christina Quorum writes, they're giving him a hard time, something, 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 I got it added. And so I think that was just another kind of talk about just logistics in terms of who was coming to this particular room and that sort. And then we saw more text messages. June 16th of 2016, Christina Quorum writing to Dave Shirley, heads up, he's probably about to do a Wild King night. Dave Shirley said, you know, SHIT, need to re-up on baby oil. Christina Quorum says, yeah, you can head out and get everything that you need. Dave Shirley writes, forgot to grab the cash, or he wrote like a $, and package from you. Then we see another message, or we see more messages. These ones from November 14th of 2021. These ones actually featuring Sean Combs himself and Christina Quorum. PD to Christina Quorum, is room ready now? Christina Quorum to PD, on with them now, any minute. We see another text message from Christina Quorum to PD, that being hotel called, Paul coming up. And we presume, you know, given the time frame, that Paul might have been the entertainer that Jane was specifically talking about during her testimony. And so it really was just kind of a lot of text exhibits that were shown from all different time frames and time ranges, including from when Cassie was in a relationship with Sean Combs, also to when Jane was in a relationship with Sean Combs too. And then just seeing just all the different kind of complexities, I guess may be the right word to say, as just far as who was involved in what assistance and how Christina Quorum would kind of go about writing these messages to make sure that the hotel room was set up for these hotel nights or Wild King nights, or what we all call them to be freak-offs too.
Hey, I want to take a quick minute to thank Upside for sponsoring our coverage of Sean Diddy Combs' trial. Now, Upside is amazing. It is a free app that gets you cash back on daily essentials like gas, groceries. I pump my gas, I can use Upside. I go out to lunch, I can use Upside. Maybe I get something at a convenience store, I can use Upside. And why not get cash back when doing all these things, right? And yes, this is actual, real cash back. It's money that appears in your Upside app that you transfer right into your bank account. So once you have the free Upside app, you claim an offer for whatever you're buying on Upside. You pay as usual using a debit or credit card. You follow the steps on the app, you get paid. So to find out how much you could earn, click the link in the description to download Upside or scan the QR code on screen, and make sure to use our promo code LC Sidebar. You'll get a special one-time offer of 35 cents back on every gallon on your first tank of gas. That's promo code LC Sidebar for a one-time special offer of an extra 35 cents back on every gallon on your first tank of gas. Sexual encounters, violence, an alleged six-figure hush payment. Those are just some of the highlights from today's testimony in Sean Diddy Combs' federal trial. Jurors were shown damning receipts, hotel records, videos, all in an effort to show a disturbing picture of alleged abuse and cover-ups. But the defense isn't backing down, arguing Cassie Ventura, the star witness in this case, wasn't a victim, she was a willing participant. We're going to be breaking all this down, what happened today in court, with Law&Crime's in-court reporter, Elizabeth Millner. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. Well, the federal trial of Sean Diddy Combs took yet another turn today. More evidence presented for the jury to consider. We're talking explicit videos, text messages, apparently arranging sexual encounters, details of a, $100,000 payment allegedly made to cover up a violent altercation. The defense fought back aggressively, highlighting missing messages, arguing his ex-girlfriend, Cassie Ventura Fine, alleged victim number one in this case, that she willingly participated in these encounters, that this is not sex trafficking. And as the prosecution prepares to rest its case, the question remains, will this mountain of evidence be enough to actually convict the music mogul of racketeering conspiracy, sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion, and transportation to engage in prostitution? Well, to help break all this down, I want to bring on Law&Crime's in-court reporter, Elizabeth Millner, who's been in that courtroom every day for every piece of testimony, including what happened today. Elizabeth, always great to see you. So, before we even talk about the testimony, a lot of preliminary issues about a juror or jurors, and also, is there something going on about a leak? Talk to us about these kind of issues before we even get into the testimony.
Yeah, well, court started a little bit earlier this morning. Normally it starts for the parties as well as us around 8:30 before the jury comes in around 8:45 and they begin testimony kind of around the 9 o'clock time frame. But bright and early this morning, the judge gets on the bench and his demeanor, Jesse, is a little bit different than normal. He seemed really kind of annoyed or kind of ticked off about something. And so what we did learn is that he was upset about this particular article that came out. Now, he was very tight-lipped as far as what media organization kind of released this article. We all kind of have our assumptions about what the article entailed, and it was a recent article that came out just about a jury issue. And the reason this is such a big deal, and just for everybody who's kind of for everybody who wants to know more about it, why it's such a big deal, it's because on Friday all of us were taken outside of the courtroom so that way they could have a sealed courtroom so that way they could talk about a particular issue. Now, at the time, we didn't know what this issue was, but we knew that it was kind of big enough for them to seal the courtroom down. Diddy was still inside the courtroom. Both parties were inside that courtroom, but all of the public, the court sketch artists, us and the press, we all had to leave for about a 20-minute time period, and then we were all let back inside. But we didn't know what this conversation was. But we believe it might pertain to this article that was released just this week about a juror getting a text message from from somebody asking them if they were juror number 6. And as we all know, and as we've all been following this case, we know that juror number 6 was the one who was ultimately dismissed from the case just this week. But the question is, who was the source that revealed to the media organization what had happened during this, what was supposed to be a closed proceeding? So the judge gets on the bench this morning and he says pretty much that somebody had spilled the beans. So he kind of confronts Maureen Comey, who is kind of lead counsel for the prosecution, and Mark Agnifilo, who is the lead counsel for the defense, kind of wondering who was the source of the leak. Now, both sides denied that they had any leaks coming from either respective camp about who gave this information to the media organization, who then released this in an article. And so the defense says they recently became aware of this leak, of this article that came out, and then obviously the prosecution was adamant that the leak didn't come from their camp. So the judge was kind of like, when he was on the bench, well, somebody's lying to me. It had to come from somebody because this courtroom was shut down. There was nobody in there except officials and doing official business. And so he said that somebody did violate the court sealing order, and then He said that he told Maureen Comey and Mark Agnifilo, again, prosecution and defense, that they're kind of on notice and that they should try to kind of find the source of the leak if it comes from their camp, and that the most extreme kind of action that he could possibly take, because he was taking this matter very seriously, Jesse, where he said the most extreme action that he could take was just a criminal contempt charges. But the thing is, nobody knows who this source is. But honestly, Jesse, I think what the biggest thing is, and kind of the biggest mystery that we all walked away from being in court today, was who was kind of the source of this leak, and possibly what kind of will end up happening in terms of any action that is taken by the judge. So that kind of remains a mystery, but what we do know is it has something to possibly do with the jurors, something, and I say that very lightly.
By the way, real quick, we got a lot of questions today on Law&Crime's live lunch show. We do it every day. A lot of people were wondering whether or not the whole dynamic of the jury is different, the vibe is different after one of the jurors was dismissed and replaced with an alternate. Have you seen anything like it? I think you even said to me today the alternate juror, might have been looking at some of the video material a little bit differently, right?
Yeah, so I think from what I can tell of the jury, that it didn't seem like they had much of a big demeanor change in terms of them losing kind of one of their own, and that obviously being juror number 6, who was dismissed from the case just yesterday. But as far as I could tell, even from the alternate who replaced that juror, kind of at the tail end of just the number lines there, that I think that, he's been following this case since the beginning, as all the alternates have. They've been following this case, they've been seeing the exact same exhibits, they've been listening to the testimony just as well as the other jurors have been. And so from what I could tell, especially as they were listening or watching the freak off videos today, that I could tell that it might have made them just a little uncomfortable, right? Because who wants to watch these types of videos in open court? And then as they're digesting it, surprisingly, they all kept a pretty straight face. But I will say, from that alternate juror who now kind of is in the main jury group, I should say, that I will say that it seemed like he was taking the headphones off pretty quickly. I think, the freak off videos and the sexually explicit videos might have been a little bit too much, especially for the morning time for these jurors to watch.
Understandable. I get it. All right, let's move on to witness testimony. So the only witness of the day today, right? Only witness was Special Agent and correct me if I'm mispronouncing her name, Dialisa Penland from the U.S. Attorney's Office of the Southern District of New York, continued her testimony from yesterday. One of these summary witnesses, when you have a voluminous amount of material, digital material, so video, text, sometimes you need a witness to kind of condense it, summarize it, give an overview of what it is, pick out the big parts into these charts, right? These summary charts. And one of the things that she testified to was the jury saw records for an escort named Jules, right? So what did we learn about Jules? What did those records show?
Well, for all the viewers who have been following the case, we know that Jules was the escort that was used, or that was also there during the Intercontinental Hotel incident in March of 2016. But as we've all been following this case, we know that Jules was somebody that Cassie and Diddy used kind of frequently in terms of their freak-offs. And so what we did see was just some more records and summary charts, which isn't the most exciting stuff. But I think it's pretty interesting in terms of, the government really just kind of putting all the puzzle pieces really together in an organized chart, so that way the jurors can kind of be like, oh, we see this connects with this, and this. And so we saw an exhibit of that flight summary chart, specifically from dates including August 26th of 2009. So going back in time a little bit here to kind of the beginning stages of Cassie and Diddy's relationship, through August 28th of 2009. So they traveled, or the reservation was for a London hotel here in New York City. The names under it were Cassie, Sean Combs, and then Jules Theodore, aka Jules, aka the escort that Cassie and Diddy had used pretty often. And so what we did see was some flight records for Jules Theodore from LAX to JFK on August 26th of 2009, and then from JFK back to LAX on August 28th of 2009. And so what I think the government did pretty well is kind of connect the dots to even just things like the charges made on the American Express statement that the account holder was for Sean Combs. And so these dates range from the American Express statement that we saw as an exhibit was from August 26th of 2009 to August 29th of 2009. So again, those same time frames where we saw charges to the London hotel. The arrival was for August of 26th of that year, and the departure date was August 29th of that year. We saw a charge for Virgin America, the airline, for $419.61. We saw a charge to the travel agency, and that being a $50 charge. We saw a charge for even a limo service around this time frame for $227.70. And then we saw another charge to American Airlines, presumably for the flight home, I think it was, for $419.60. And of course, that account holder being registered to Sean Combs. And so we saw the ending balance for that month, that being again August of 2009 for Sean Combs's American Express statement. And it was a lot of money. It was $218,353. So it was just a lot of money, kind of nearing in that $250,000 range as far as just a credit card statement just for the month of August of 2009. And then we saw some corresponding text messages too from that same time frame where Cassie writes to Jules, "Hey, how are you? Give me a call when you get this." Jules responds, "Did you two leave?" Cassie says, "Here's your booking locator." And then she sent kind of all the information as far as the flight goes. And then Jules said, "Thank you." Cassie says, "Have a safe flight." And then Jules responds, "Thank you and happy B-Day." And so there were just some more kind of similar summaries that the jury was able to see that really kind of connects the dots between the flight summaries to the American Express statement charges, and then even just the corresponding account numbers that kind of went into paying off that particular American Express statement, as well as records from the hotel, and then notes attached from the hotel reservation. So really kind of taking it piece by piece by piece. And I understand, charts aren't the most exciting thing, but it really makes a lot of sense when you kind of put it into the full context.
I think they're so important. If you're trying to prove transportation to engage in prostitution, right? Transporting sex workers and alleged victims for the purposes of sex work, this is exactly the kind of evidence that you need. Transporting people, right? Transporting sex workers, alleged victims, it's also part of sex trafficking. There is a commercial element to that, right? There is a travel component to that. So the payment receipts, the credit cards, the travel records, these are all so important. They're granular, they're specific, they're data-driven, but they are so important in proving these charges. What about this hotel stay for someone named Dave? How was that booked?
So it looked very similar, honestly, to Jules's kind of records too, where we saw the flight summary exhibit, those for the dates of September 15th of 2014 through September 17th of 2014. And so we saw that the reservation was at the Four Seasons Hotel in Los Angeles. So instead of New York City, it was in Los Angeles, and the reservation name was for a person named Eli Maroon. And what we know about Eli Maroon is that he's one of Diddy's assistants. And so the names kind of corresponding with this particular time frame were Sean Combs and Clayton Howard, aka Dave. Now, what kind of stood out to me, honestly, Jesse, was that Cassie's name wasn't in this kind of list of names. But then I kind of thought about it around this time frame that they wouldn't need to fly her out, mainly because she already lives in Los Angeles around this time frame, or also possibly that it wasn't her in this hotel room. So you could really kind of see it both ways, but really just the names that we saw attached to it were Sean Combs and Clayton Howard, aka Dave. And so the flight records were for Clayton Howard from JFK to LAX on September 15th of 2014, and then from LAX back to JFK on September 17th of 2014. So just departing just a couple days later. Then we see a charge, or the American Express statement charges for the Four Seasons Hotel around September 15th of 2014. And then we also see a charge for Journey Corp Travel Agency for $50. So that is the travel agency that's been used to kind of help book a number of flights or hotels too. And so then we see an exhibit of 5 different bank accounts that helped pay off this American Express card statement. And the accounts were assigned to Combs Enterprise, Bad Boy Entertainment, Bad Boy Productions, Finance Department. And then we see the records from the Four Seasons Hotel, where the reservation, again, being under Eli Maroon. The arrival date was for September 15th of 2014, the departure date being September 17th of 2014, and the room rate being about $495. We see a payment for American Express with the account number that's assigned to the cards that Diddy had. And then we see the contact name under this particular reservation, or this hotel record, I should say, from Christina Coram. And so just another thing that's kind of attaching her. So it's kind of pretty sad that we're not seeing her being called as a government witness per se, or possibly even a witness altogether. We just have to wait and see. But under the reservation notes for the Four Seasons Hotel, it says Mr. Eli Maroon asked for a room to be added to his reservation. And then we see a travel invoice for Bad Boy Entertainment, and the passenger being Clayton Howard, aka Dave. So again, these are just some of kind of the way that the government was presenting these types of summary charts, where it's really just the flight summary chart, kind of putting it all together, and then really taking it again piece by piece, really connecting the flights, because the defense can really be like, okay, well, how do we know that the people there were actually there at this specific time frame? And so they, they did what they could under cross-examination. I know we'll talk about that later, but in terms of just what the government was doing, I feel like they kind of did a pretty good job in really just putting it all together and really kind of laying it out in a very kind of layman's type of way, so that way we could all kind of understand, and it clicks right there.
Right, because when Cassie testified or Jane testified, they would talk about alleged sex workers being transported to X, Y, and Z. This obviously corroborates their testimony, but now you can actually, exactly like you said, you can pinpoint it. You can link Sean Combs, you can link the money, you can link the travel, and that is key here. That is key. So it was introduced by the alleged victims, and now they're really trying to finalize it and really make it crystal clear for the jury. One of the things that came up a lot during the course of this case, even from the very beginning, was about the damage to hotel rooms, right? These freak-off events, how elaborate they are, how intense they were. There were records about hotel damage fees, right? Those were shown to the jury as well. What did we learn about that?
Yeah, so what we did learn is that there were hotel invoices, hotel records, just more documents that were shown today. So for example, we saw one hotel invoice for Phil Pines. What we know about Phil Pines is that although he wasn't someone that was called to testify that we know of, he is somebody that we do know used to be Sean Combs' assistant. And so we saw that hotel invoice under Phil Pines' name, but a charge for $500 because of damage to drapes, something that's been testified to even previously. But we also saw another exhibit, that being a hotel invoice for L'Hermitage Hotel, and then it was a $1,700 charge for linen damage, but I think they ended up taking away that $700, so it ended up just being a $1,000 charge. But the hotel was booked under a Mr. Ryan Lopez. What do we know about Mr. Ryan Lopez is that he's also somebody that used to be Diddy's assistant. And so then we kind of see around this time frame, just again, those American Express statements that really kind of showed, or the government was able to show, that this American Express statement also paid off some of these damages, including the damage for drapes or the damages for the linens. And so even though they didn't happen around the same time frame, the government was able to kind of really show with this particular witness that these charges were paid off using the American Express.
Mm-hmm. And there's also a conversation about the 2016 event, right? The infamous 2016 event,
Yes.
Arguably the most important evidence in this case, because it helps to prove a pattern of abuse towards women. It helps to prove sex trafficking. This is where Cassie was seen on tape being beaten by Sean Combs. She claims she was leaving a freak off when this happened. You see her dragging her back towards that room. We've already heard testimony about Sean Combs allegedly bribing a hotel security officer so that video would never see the light of day. But now we get the records, and now we get the text messages, right? The text messages all surrounding that event and the flurry of activity that surrounded that event. What did we learn?
Yeah, so it was presented under kind of a different exhibit as opposed to the flight summary charts, right? It was presented kind of in a way as just a timeline where we were able to see just calls that were made, text messages that were sent. If a voicemail happened, we were able to see that. We were able to see if there were images sent with text messages. So they really kind of just laid it all out there. And while there were some messages that we've already seen, it was really kind of nice to have it all just lumped together in terms of just how the events all occurred, especially on that specific day. So it really kind of, they brought it back to March 4th of 2016, where you see Diddy calling Cassie at 6:04 p.m. That was when he initiated communication that day, and that Cassie had called Diddy at 6:05 p.m. Then we see a message from Garen to Cassie, Garen being somebody that Cassie used for Cowboys for Angels to kind of coordinate and get the escorts to these hotels or wherever their freak-offs would occur, where Garen writes to her, "Fun tonight? question mark, and that's at 6:21. Cassie responds, yes, LA. Then Garen responds, Mr. Schuyler. Cassie responds, yes, but anyone new. Then Diddy calls Cassie at 6:39 p.m. That call wasn't answered. Then Cassie writes to Garen, okay, can you put him on notice? It might be 7:30. Just Schuyler is good. Then Diddy calls Cassie about 3 different times at 7:48 p.m., 7:49 p.m., 7:51 p.m. Then Schuyler texts Cassie where he said, hey, you smiley face, I can be there around 10:30 or 11 p.m. Diddy calls Cassie 3 more times. There was no answer. Schuyler writes to Cassie, what time and where would you like to meet? Then Cassie responds to Schuyler, okay, can you do 3 a.m.? So then we get to the next day, that being March 5th, where Schuyler writes to Cassie, I know you're doing a good job. I wanted to say keep it up. I'm going to lay my head down. Then Diddy calls Cassie. It wasn't answered. And that's between 11:28 a.m. to 11:35 a.m. on March 5th. And then we see photos of Cassie's bruises. And again, these were the ones that she had testified to that she took in the back of the Uber. She's wearing sunglasses, but she says by that point, what had happened at the Intercontinental Hotel as far as the assault goes had already occurred because she is covering up one of the black eyes. So we're able to see that image once again on this timeline. Then what we see again from March 5th of 2016 is Diddy calling Cassie a few times. Diddy then texts her saying, call now. Cassie texts Diddy, I went and checked everything and spoke to security. Jules left, so you're good. Diddy responds to Cassie, call me now. And then some time goes by, and then he writes back, cops are here. Diddy calls Cassie 3 more times. Then Cassie calls D-Rock. Diddy texts Cassie, so you're going to abandon me? And then some time goes by, then he says, call me, please. Cassie texts Diddy, I have a premiere on Monday for the biggest thing I've ever done. I have a black eye and fat lip. You're sick for thinking what you've done is okay. Please stay far away from me. And obviously she said more things, but I was trying to write down everything as fast as I could. But again, it's one of the messages that we've already seen in this case before, but now it's kind of laid out in just a timeline and sequence of events. And so then afterwards, Diddy calls Cassie a bunch of times. Then D-Rock calls Cassie. Then Christina Coram calls Cassie, kind of again going to what Cassie had testified, where she just got a bunch of calls from all these different people trying to get a hold of her. Then we see that Diddy had texted Cassie, if you don't pick up, you'll never hear my voice again. And then Diddy writes, I'm getting arrested. Diddy calls Cassie 4 more times between 1:05 p.m. that day and 11:26 p.m. Then we see Christina Coram text Eli Maroon, what room is he in? And that happens at 1:09 p.m. Then D-Rock texts Christina Coram, is Puff at the house? Cassie then calls D-Rock a few times. The calls connect, but only for just a short time period. Then D-Rock messages Christina Coram, I'm in the car headed to you. Then Cassie texts Christina Coram, can you please tell him the neighbors are about to call the police? And remember, if you kind of go back to her testimony where she had said she finally got home, then there was kind of just a commotion that happened over at her place. And then they believed that the neighbors had called the police because of just what they were hearing as kind of a noise disturbance type of thing. And so then D-Rock writes to Christina Coram, tell him that he needs to get out of there. And Christina Coram writes to Cassie, sorry, urgent, please call me back. I got him, we're leaving. Then Cassie writes to Christina Coram, thank you, please take away any keys that he has. So at 3:27 p.m. that day, Christina Coram writes to Cassie, talk to him. He promised he won't go back over if you just talk to him for 5 minutes. And then a couple, time goes by a little bit here. And then Christina Coram also writes to Cassie, sorry, don't want to be in the middle. Just want to make sure he doesn't go over there. And so, while, on its face, it doesn't seem like it's a lot, but because we've seen these messages before. But again, it's really just kind of laying out just everything that had happened. And I think also what was interesting, Jesse, is that they really kind of started laying out the sequence of events in terms of just Eddie Garcia's role and what had happened after the Intercontinental Hotel incident too. And as we all know from his testimony, that he was the one who gave the video of he gave the surveillance video to Diddy for a price, and a pretty hefty price too, that being about 6 figures.
How could I not bring up experts in the litigation field? Our great partner and sponsor, Morgan & Morgan. This is America's largest injury firm, and honestly, they have an amazing track record. In the past few months, Morgan & Morgan secured a $9.3 million verdict for a car crash victim in Florida, a $5.6 million verdict for another car accident victim in Atlanta, and not to mention $1.8 million in Kentucky after insurance offered them a mere $5,000 in that case. And even if you think your case isn't worth millions of dollars, why not just start a claim and fight for what you deserve? Morgan & Morgan, they make it so simple. You can start a claim from your phone in just 8 clicks. Everything from signing contracts to uploading documents to talking to your legal team, it can all be done through the phone. So if you're injured, you can easily start a claim at forthepeople.com/LC sidebar. A juror about to be dismissed? A visit from Kanye West and guns, baby oil, and king nights. What a day it was in the Sean Diddy Combs criminal trial. We're going to break it all down for you right now. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. Yeah, like I said, a lot happened today in Sean Combs' racketeering, sex trafficking, prostitution trial. So much so, we don't even need an introduction. Let me just bring on right now Elizabeth Millner, Law&Crime's in-court reporter who was there for every minute of the action, including what happened when the jury wasn't present, because there was a lot there too. So first of all, Elizabeth, good to see you. Big development today. This juror, we knew there was an issue with a juror, and the judge, if I'm understanding what happened today, the judge basically accused the juror of making misrepresentations to the court to what? Stay on the jury? And the judge had wanted to dismiss this juror, but then there was some pushback from the defense, and now my understanding is there's not a resolution. He might wait till after the weekend to make a decision on this juror. What is going on here?
Yeah, it seemed like this was kind of a big focus of today outside of Kanye West trying to attend court today. But as far as today goes, a lot of people wanted to know what was going to happen to juror number 6. Now, a lot of the time, especially earlier this week, they were very tight-lipped as far as just what the details were surrounding what the issue was. But what we've learned from the judge later this afternoon is it was a lot of kind of inconsistent statements that this juror was making all the way going back to voir dire. And so what the judge said that he looked back at the transcript because there were conversations with this particular juror that happened twice already at this point at the robing room. So unfortunately, it was something that we don't see in the transcripts, nor are we listening to it happen when it's happening inside the court because it's happening behind closed doors pretty much. But as far as the judge is concerned, the issue came up after that offhand conversation that this juror had with jury staff, just talking about kind of making that travel from New Jersey to New York. And that's a big problem, right? Because in New Jersey, that's not where the jury pool was taken from. They were taken from counties here in New York City, Westchester County, Bronx County, and even here in Manhattan too. And so this juror told the staffer that he recently moved to New Jersey with his girlfriend and said something along the lines of, "It may not be permanent. I've been staying there the last couple of weeks." And so the juror was asked if he stayed at his home. Was it either in New Jersey or was it in the Bronx? So at one point he's saying he's spending 4 or 5 nights here in New York City at his apartment here. But on the other hand, he's saying he's in New Jersey where his girlfriend or fiance is there, but also with their baby daughter. And so in voir dire, this particular juror said that he lives in the Bronx with his fiance and daughter, but in the robing room, he said that he lived in New Jersey. And so the judge was like, there are several inconsistencies. The issue here is the juror was unable to follow instructions, and those were the simple instructions that were given to these juries during their questionnaire portion as far as where do they live and who do they live with. And so the judge was saying there were serious issues with this juror's candor, and that he didn't believe that they needed to do any further inquiry as far as questioning this juror once again. So that would make it, I think, questioning him, 3 or 4 times probably at this point, and that the court is concerned about the changing of the answers, the inconsistencies, and that the omissions and inconsistencies kind of played a role into the judge's decision, which initially he was going to dismiss this juror. I think he was pretty concerned that if this juror were to go and deliberate, that this could cause more issues later on in the process. But then the defense stands up and they're like, you know what, Judge? These answers don't really affect this particular juror's ability to serve on this particular jury. He says this is kind of a thing for a lot of people who live in this area, that they have significant others who live in New Jersey, or it's vice versa, where people who live in New Jersey have significant others in New York. And that this particular juror should be given the opportunity to explain himself again. And so the defense was really kind of honing in on the idea that these jurors have been very attentive throughout this entire process of the trial so far. Like I always mentioned, during our hitch, Jesse, that a lot of these jurors are paying attention. They're taking notes, like in both parties, as well as the judge kind of commends the jurors for being so attentive while inside the court. And so the defense was really kind of adding to that and said, I'm worried that the court eats equals or equates inconsistencies with lies. And so the defense said, we've taken strides to get this diverse jury, and we will go backwards kind of as far as just, less diversity if this particular juror was dismissed, because one of their arguments previously is that the government just wanted to dismiss this juror because this particular juror is black. However, the government took offense to that, and they said that no additional inquiry is necessary. Mr. Donaldson suggesting that this is motivated by race, but it's really just about preserving the record. And the judge said, okay, well, if he indicated that he splits his time in New Jersey and the Bronx during voir dire, this would be one completely different story. But he said during the voir dire process, during jury selection, that he lived in the Bronx. So he said it's not just an issue of the juror wanting to just be on the jury, but he also said that his bills go to New York, and it seemed like the juror was particularly just wanting to stay on this particular case. And so the judge was like, we don't need him to reconcile these inconsistencies. There shouldn't have been inconsistencies in the first place. And the defense is like, well, we compromise the integrity of the process if we make this jury less diverse. And they say that this issue everyone knew about, and this was Brian Steele at this point making this argument. But then both sides were kind of like, no, we did not know about this. This was just an issue that came up this week. Then what was interesting, Jesse, was there was this moment where we thought that we would get an answer to what was happening. The judge dismissed a lot of us from the courtroom. We were outside of that courtroom for about 20 to 25 minutes. We thought when we were going to come back, we'd learn what would happen. And unfortunately, we do not know the full scope of what's going to be happening next.
Yeah, that's interesting. You don't always see that where the judge is pretty firm in a decision and basically makes the argument that the juror was saying whatever they needed to say to stay on the jury, and yet kind of persuaded, it seems, a little bit by the defense's arguments. So now going to wait till next week to find out if this juror is going to be dismissed. That's why we have alternates. You would think that would be the biggest part of today. It wasn't. Kanye West shows up. Now, he is a friend. He is a supporter of Sean Combs, and he shows up in court today, or to court today, in dramatic fashion, but he doesn't quite get into the courtroom, does he?
No, he doesn't. Unfortunately, Kanye West, or Ye as he's being called now, he did not get his way, so he was not inside the main courtroom, nor did I see him inside the main courtroom at any point today. So it's unclear, and hopefully they do not know this, but I don't believe the jury has any kind of notice that Kanye West was trying to get into the courtroom. He was able to get in the courthouse. From what I understand is he was sent to the media overflow room with Christian Combs, which is Diddy's son, as well as Charlucci, who's been at a lot of days of Diddy's trial, as well as even the pre-trial stuff, and he's a good close friend of Diddy as well. But as far as Kanye West being inside the main courtroom, that didn't happen. And from what I understand, he was only in the overflow room for about 20 minutes before kind of making his grand exit and leaving. But I'm sure he'll try to get back to the courthouse, possibly later on in this trial. And
I understand he was sitting next to Sean Combs' son, so yeah, he was there for a little bit and then left. Would have been interesting if he was actually in the main courtroom. Okay, now I want to get into the substance of what happened today. And by the way, even before the government's first witness of the day was called, there was something major that happened. There was a series of text messages that were introduced into evidence, right? One was from Sean Combs to Christina Coram, KK, his former chief of staff. And another one was from Cassie to Combs' former security guard, D-Rock. These were introduced into evidence, right? Why were these so significant? What were these messages?
Yeah, so this was at a point where the jury was present, so they were able to see and hear about these text messages. And finally, the exhibit screen is back on for the gallery after Jane has completed her testimony. So we were finally able to see these exhibits as well. And so the first one was data that was collected from Christina Coram's cell phone. And so they showed messages from Christina Coram to Diddy on November 21st of 2023, where Diddy, and he had the name Puff Music in this particular message, said, make sure Robin isn't doing anything dumb and paying her rent on time. Now, if you think about that in context, November of 2023 was around the time that Diddy was already paying for Jane's rent at this point. And so I think these messages had to do with Jane and just the fact that Diddy was paying for her rent around this time.
So if I remember correctly, she had texted basically the rent was paid. And the reason that's so significant, right, is because the prosecution says, oh, him paying her rent, you know, him telling her she can't do OnlyFans. It's a way for him to control her financial well-being, finances, wealth. It's a way to exert coercion for sex trafficking purposes, right? That's what the prosecution has been trying to say, that force, fraud, coercion has been used to induce her into these sex acts with male performers, commercial sex workers, that's sex trafficking. It happened in all these different locations. So the more they can show, oh, he's paying for her rent, that's significant. Now, the defense's point of view, I guess, would be she knew what she was getting into. She was getting the benefit of this relationship. He was paying for things for her. So it's interesting to hear that. And obviously for Christina Coram, the more the prosecution can say assistants were a part of this, that's how you get to racketeering conspiracy. That's how you get to him using his inner circle, his staff, his assistants to facilitate crimes, to facilitate prostitution, to facilitate sex trafficking. It's all important for racketeering. Okay, sorry to interrupt. There was another message that came in, right? What was that about?
Yeah, so this message, this was actually kind of an interesting point. So it was from a cell phone that was seized from Damian Butler. And who is Damian Butler? He is none other than D-Rock himself, one of Diddy's longtime security guards, but also a close personal friend of Diddy, too. And so it was interesting because we saw kind of the stipulations between both of the parties where this particular cell phone from Damian Butler was seized on September 22nd of 2024 at Newark Airport. However, these messages date back to January of 2017 when Diddy was still in a relationship with Cassie at this point. And so Cassie sent a text message to D-Rock that's saying, my bathroom door is broken down. He has my keys. I'm leaving because I don't feel safe. I'm not effing with anyone else. I wasn't going to anyone's house. I was going home. Then we see D-Rock had messaged back, okay, someone was following you home. I don't think that's a good idea to leave your home. Then Cassie responds, he thinks I'm going somewhere else. The key has a blue fuzzy tail. Take it. And D-Rock said, I can't take your keys from him. He also said a couple more things too, but I think what the prosecution was trying to introduce is just, again, another point where Diddy staffers were kind of doing things on his behalf in this instance where Cassie is kind of relaying that she wants the keys to her home back, and Damian Butler, aka D-Rock, doesn't want to take them away from his boss at this point, which we know to be Sean Combs, aka Diddy.
And again, goes to her alleged force, fraud, coercion. Remember, she makes up one of the individual sex trafficking counts. So look at the environment she's in. Look at her, big question is, could she have walked away? Could she have escaped? Could she have fought back? Look at the environment she's in. I think this is an important message ultimately for the jury to consider. Now, we get into the testimony of a special agent from Homeland Security who, my understanding, was part of the raid at Combs' LA mansion last year. Remember, his properties in LA and Miami were raided by federal agents. And they found a lot at this house, right? Elizabeth, what did they find?
And honestly, Jesse, I'm not going to lie, I love a good evidence day. But then there were points during this where I was kind of like, okay, well, what are we really getting to? What is kind of the point? But I'll kind of explain it. So yes, Andre Lemon was one of the Homeland Security, and he works for Homeland Security Investigations, and he is a special agent. So he's assigned to the Human Trafficking Group, and specifically in the Los Angeles office. So on March 25th of 2024, what did he do? Well, he was none other than at Diddy's LA mansion, that one in Mapleton that a lot of the jury has been hearing about ad nauseum at this point. And so what was interesting is that they said, Andre Lemon had testified that Homeland Security Investigations here in New York asked for assistance for this search in LA. And so Andre Lemon's role was kind of seizing and processing the evidence for the office here in New York. And so right off the bat, we're seeing a number of exhibit photos. So we see Diddy's home in Los Angeles. We see kind of a point from the front of the home as well as a point from the back of the home. And it's a beautiful, gorgeous property, but it's also humongous because there's 3 different buildings alone just on this property. You have the main home, you have the sauna, which, I mean, hello, he's rich. Of course he would have a sauna-like building. And then he has a gym and a studio because obviously he is, this mega hit maker, and he has a studio and a gym, and he has a lot of money too. So of course he would have 3 buildings and they would all just be humongous. And so we got to see more of just some of the items that were found specifically in the Los Angeles homes, because previously we saw what was found in the Miami home. So now we got a kind of a peek into what was found in the Los Angeles home. So at first we see an exhibit where it's like this detailed layout of the property. The basement isn't shown in this particular kind of layout. We see the first floor of the home, the security room, the garage. The second floor had the master bedroom, the closet. And so inside the master bedroom, because we saw an exhibit photo of it, it was kind of a white bed, a messy nightstands in a way, and then two chairs kind of in front of the bed. And so the exhibit kind of showing inside of the specific drawer in the nightstand was 6 manila envelopes with the letter K on it. Then we see kind of another stipulation. We find out what that K tested positive for, at least the powdery residue that was found inside the manila folder, and that tested positive for ketamine. But also inside that nightstand were just, other things that people have in their nightstands, like earrings, chargers, cell phones, iPads, and Vaseline too. And so then we see an exhibit photo of the closet, which was, I guess, on the opposite wall of the master bedroom, where there was a specific safe in this closet. So inside that safe, we saw Diddy's passport, we saw money, a plastic bag with this substance that kind of looked like paprika in a way, but we learned that that later tested positive for MDMA or Molly, and then we saw just kind of clothes sprawled out within this closet. Then we also saw none other than baby oil in a bag, Astroglide. We saw lingerie that was also found in the closet. And it was interesting because Andre Lamont testified that around this entire property, 600 bottles of baby oil were seized, but 900 bottles of Astroglide were seized, because inside Diddy's home, there were just kind of stacks and stacks and boxes, and all of it had Astroglide. And I think also what's notably interesting is that all of it was kind of organized in a way that was just very neat and organized, like stacked all together. All the tops were facing the same way. It was kind of that type of thing. But then one of the big things, and I think this was kind of maybe a sticking point of where the prosecution was going, was the security room and what was found inside the security room. And so inside it was firearms, because of course Diddy has a large security staff at this point, and it's a little bit different than the security staff he had kind of in the earlier years, because witnesses have testified that the security he had kind of in the later years, especially around the time that his homes were raided, were more professional, and that they did carry weapons. And so we saw exhibits of 2 chairs in the security room with firearms on these chairs. And so it was a bolt-action Ruger rifle, a Smith & Wesson rifle, which was like a semi-automatic AR-15, a Glock. We saw a Glock pistol in the rifle close up. There were 3 30-round magazines, a Glock magazine, 2 locks for the pistol holder, and then a 5.11 bag, which is a bag that Andre Lamont said that was pretty much just to hold things. And we see a drum magazine. It was 60 rounds, and then 59 rounds of bullets were found. And so then the witness, that being Special Agent Andre Lamont, showed the jury this kind of big giant rifle. And so only one of the firearms didn't have a serial number on it, and Andre Lamont testified that it might have been sanded off because it was kind of smooth to touch as far as where the serial number would originally be placed. And then finally we see an exhibit, and that was the safe in the security room. And so at the end, the direct examination ended with just, again, that photo, but that Andre Lamont testified that it appears to be a firearm safe. And then I thought, okay, maybe there's a little bit more. And then the direct ended, and then we got to cross. And so I think they were trying to really kind of point out that there was a large amount of weapons inside Diddy's home. But as the defense kind of pointed out, there might have been a reason why there were a large amount of weapons in that home, but for a specific reason, not to what the government is alleging.
So a lot of things to break down there. You would wonder, it's a lot of firepower. That is a lot of firepower. And if you go back to his indictment, under methods and means of the racketeering conspiracy, it's one of the sections. And remember, we're talking about a criminal enterprise. I'm going to read you what it says because I think it's important. Members and associates of the Combs enterprise, including Combs security personnel, at times carried firearms. On more than one occasion, Combs himself carried or brandished firearms to intimidate and threaten others, including victims and witnesses to his abuse. In or about March 2024, during searches of Combs' residences in Miami, Florida, and Los Angeles, California, law enforcement seized firearms and ammunition, including 3 AR-15s with defaced serial numbers, as well as a drum magazine. So they're basically trying to prove what they alleged in the indictment, but it goes more to this idea of him being a criminal leader, right? That's what they're trying to sell. Look at using these different instruments to facilitate a pattern of criminal conduct. And, you know, the baby oil, the things like that, those are products or alleged products of sex trafficking. So I think it's really important for the jury to understand what was ultimately at his home. Elizabeth, on cross-examination, where did they go? Because they can't argue away what was there, but didn't they provide a little bit more context about where it was found and what could be the value of it?
Well, initially, and I'll just kind of spill this to you, Jesse, and I'm pretty sure you already know about this, but before, originally the defense didn't want Andre Lamont to be testifying because he wasn't the one who had removed or moved the rifles from the security room to kind of lay them out. Somebody else did. And then there was kind of a whole argument about chain of custody, who did what, and how did these firearms get placed on the chairs when they belonged in the security room. And so that's what Mark Agnifilo really kind of spoke about during his cross-examination today. So he was asking questions like, you're aware that Mr. Combs has a security service? Andre Lamont responds, yes. They show that exhibit photo of the layout of the home, which shows the security office, and that the guns were recovered only from that specific place inside that home. And again, it's a massive property, but according to Mark Agnifilo, the guns were only in that security office. They weren't sprawled out everywhere across the home, because he was asking questions like, okay, you saw that there were bedrooms where children live, and those being Diddy's children, obviously. And then Andre Lamont is like, correct. Okay, well, there were no ammunition found in the bedrooms. Andre Lamont says, correct. Okay, well, was the security door open? Andre Lamont responds, yes. Or was the door locked beforehand, that being the door to the security office? Andre Lamont responds, he doesn't know. Well, could you see if it had a lock? And Andre Lamont is like, well, it had a doorknob. I didn't look at the lock. And then Mark Agnifilo is like, well, you didn't take pictures of the state of the door when law enforcement arrived. And Andre Lamont responded, he doesn't know if photos were taken before that they were arrived. And Mark Agnifilo is like, well, do you know, was the safe open before law enforcement got there? Andre Lamont says, I don't know. Do you know how the safe got open? No. This was specifically a gun safe. Yes. And so we see the gun safe exhibit again. And then this photo doesn't specify how this safe was open, whether it was manipulated to be open, or I guess maybe whether it just opened on its own. And so Mark Agnifilo is like, okay, well, what do you do as a lead agent on a search? And so Andre Lamont responds, he looks for items to be seized. He advises the search teams. He advises HSI New York. Mark Agnifilo is like, okay, well, as lead, wouldn't you want to know where the weapons were found? Because that was kind of a big thing. And Andre Lamont is kind of like, yes and no, as far as just their standard operating procedure, because for the most part, another team comes in, and what they do is kind of secure the location, get all the people out of the home. Because if you guys have been following this case from when the raids happened, and then you know when the surveillance video is released a little bit after, guns were drawn, people were kind of pulled out of the home with weapons, they were handcuffed, there were photos circulating of Diddy's sons being handcuffed and being placed on the grass outside of the property around this time frame. And so I think the defense was really trying to point out, okay, well, what happened once this home was cleared, and how was everything placed, and in what manner, and that type of thing. And so Andre Lamont was asked, have you seen a photo of the safe before? And he says no. And then he's asked, did you have a meeting on how to conduct a search? Is this protocol photographing items before it's moved to another place? Andre Lamont says yes. But then Andre Lamont says the SRT, which is the team that clears the home, they don't take photos of the items. Their job is solely just to clear the home, make sure it's safe, those types of things. And so Mark Agnifilo is like, okay, well, you have no idea where the guns were. Were they scattered in the security room, or were they in the safe? And then as far as Homeland Security investigations, they don't necessarily know. And then kind of towards the end of the cross-examination, he is asked, how many times have you found baby oil and Astroglide in your 60 searches? Because if he's under the human trafficking group, and then there's baby oil and Astroglide, he, being Andre Lamont, responded, okay, well, just once. And then towards the end of the cross-examination, I did see Diddy kind of give Mark Agnifilo a little thumbs up, kind of signaling that he was good on the questions that were asked. And I think there were kind of enough holes possibly poked during the cross-examination, and then that's kind of where they ended there.
Well, was he so happy that he was nodding to the jury? Because didn't that come up today too? Didn't the prosecutor say, hey, my staff is seeing him nodding during that cross-examination? And we know last week the judge said, or was it the week before, the judge said, don't do that. Don't do that. I will, if I see you making any kind of motion towards the jury, I will give this jury a limiting instruction that you will not like, or I will kick Sean Combs out of the courtroom. Didn't that happen today too, or that was alleged?
Oh no, that definitely happened today. But as far as kind of what happened, I think it was a little different from the really kind of harsh language that the judge was using beforehand. So this was brought up after Andre Lamond was off the stand, after the jury was dismissed for a little bit for a logistical issue. So the government stood up and they were like, okay, we were informed, and AUSA Maureen Comey is making this argument. She says that one of her colleagues had messaged her saying that she saw during the cross-examination of both Andre Lamond and Jane during her testimony too, that Mr. Combs was nodding during the cross-examination. And then Brian Steele, who sits normally to Diddy's left, stands up and is like, you know what, Judge, Mr. Combs has been nothing but professional. And, you know, I will say there were times where I did kind of see him nodding along. So the AUSA and the prosecution's office wasn't wrong here. But then the judge was kind of like, well, it's impossible to police every single reaction that the defendant is having because he is human, because, you know, he can't just sit there and watch his demeanor and mannerisms at every single point during the trial. There's a lot of stuff going to be happening. So he didn't give such a harsh instruction like he did the other week. But I think if it becomes kind of more of an issue, then the judge will really kind of have to take this matter just a little bit more seriously.